afternoon. I hope that all of you can hear us well. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. The topic, of course, is how to be your best self in a male-dominated industry and still give yourself some TLC. This webinar is brought to you by the FPSA Women's Alliance Network, as well as our member company, JBT Corporation. I am Diane Wolf, and I'm a member of the Women's Alliance, as well as being the co-lead of the Professional Development Committee, which is the host of these webinars. Just to tell you a little bit about FPSA Women's Network, our network has been around for a couple of years. It helps provide knowledge and strategies for our members to succeed in their current as well as hopefully future positions within the industry. And what we're really about is encouraging more women to be in beverage and food processing, manufacturing, and for the many suppliers that provide equipment and services to us. So our network is tailored for women of all ages, all positions, and we do open these webinars up to all of FPSA's membership. So we do have men and folks from across our industry that are listening today. If you want more, you can see the screen, more information, fpsa.org networks, and you can learn a little bit more, or you can reach out directly to Elena and she can let you know about the many activities that we have. Today, I don't want to take much more of the time because Lynn has a lot to tell us and a lot to share with us today. We have a terrific presenter, and but I do want to give you just a couple of housekeeping items. First is the FPSA website. We'll be recording this, and so this will be available for you if you wanted to re-record it. If you have to leave in the middle of it, it will be available for you. I also wanted to give a shout out to one of our listeners today, Dr. Maria Nardone, who has been a long-term friend of FPSA, is among our audience today. Hello there, Maria. I haven't had the pleasure of meeting you. I also want to tell folks that you can chat questions throughout the presentation. We are going to hold them to the end because we're going to be conscious of time. So I'll look through the questions. I may reframe them a bit. And Lynn and I will have a bit of a dialogue at the end so we can ask her those questions. So feel free to ask your questions. We just won't get them to the end. I think with that, I'd like to introduce our speaker. I also, by the way, I'm going to tell you now, I'm going to go off a video so you don't have to watch me through Lynn's presentation. So my camera is going to go off, my voice is going to go mute, and you'll be able to focus on our presenter. Lynn is currently the Deputy General Counsel and Division General Counsel for JBT Corporation. I love that she's also an engineer, chemical engineer, and then went to law school. So love that, you know, there's just something about engineers that love engineers. So I love that about her. We were chatting a little bit before to see who we knew in common in the industry. The other thing I want to tell you before I hand this over to Lynn is Lynn has a couple of polling questions, so stay close to your computer. And so she's going to be asking those questions just to kind of frame her audience and understand who's on the call today. So stay close to your computer. And if there's more than one of you in the room, somebody's going to decide who's going to answer. So with that, I will hand it over to Lynn. And thank you so much for agreeing to talk with us today, Lynn. And it's yours.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you for the invitation from the FPSA Women's Alliance Network. I really appreciate this opportunity. Elena, is my screen showing? Because I'm just seeing myself. I just want to make sure my screen is showing.
Yep, we're seeing your screen.
All righty, great. So just a little bit about myself. My name is Lynn Watkins Asiambi. I'm a trusted business counselor at JBT. JBT is a global technology solution provider in the food equipment manufacturing space. I have over 20 years of corporate experience, starting my career as a chemical engineer in food manufacturing. So you can say I'm a corporate legal generalist with a keen eye on providing effective and efficient business solutions for my clients. I do this by attentively listening, asking questions, and strategically thinking through the most appropriate recommendations to apply to the situation. Professionally, I'm a lifelong learner who doesn't shy away from challenges, having obtained a JD MBA from a top-tier institution. Personally, I'm committed to equitable education and opportunities for our future leaders along with my husband. And oh, by the way, I'm a baseball mom of 2. One a pitcher, one a catcher, so competition runs in our blood. So we have a few polling questions that I wanted to ensure I'm tailoring my comments correctly today. So Elena, I invite you to put up the polling questions.
Yep. First one is up.
All righty.
And we're gonna close it. And would you like me to share the first one?
Sure, go right ahead.
Majority over 10 plus years, 25% 1 to 5 years.
All righty. So we have mostly 10 plus, you said? Because I can't see the result. Okay.
57% 10 plus years.
All right. Next one.
What type of role do you have within your organization? Okay, we're going to close the poll. 42% are individual contributors, 3% are supervisors, 39% are managers of small teams, 0% are large percent of large teams, and 15% are senior leaders.
All right. Got a good mixture there.
Yeah.
All righty. Next question.
How many working moms do we have today with us? Going to close. 40% are working moms and 60% are not working moms.
Okay.
And then
And our last final question, I think.
What are you hoping to get out of today's presentation? Okay, we're going to close the poll in a few seconds. And 40% want to learn a few tricks of the trade for networking effectively. 26% want a few new insights on how they can do more time for me. 69% a few new things to consider to be bolder in my interactions. And 6% none of these.
All righty. Well, thank you so much again for that. This gives me great insight into how we're going to spend these next 40 or so minutes. So I am going back to sharing my screen. Can you see it, Elena?
Sure can.
All righty. All righty. So thanks again for participating in the polling questions. It helps me to, again, tailor my comments for who's here. So our agenda, it's 3 parts, really based on the flyer. One about branding yourself, one about networking, and I put work in caps for a reason, and about me time. So how do you brand the best of you? As I mentioned in my remarks, I'm a trusted business counselor for my company. This didn't happen overnight. When I joined JBT in 2016, every project that I was involved in, afterwards, I asked for feedback. I sought it from not only my manager, but peers on my team, just so that I can understand expectations of the company coming in as a newbie, as I call myself, and being able to tailor my interactions going forward. I wasn't changing myself necessarily, but at least I was looking to get direction on how best to show up and brand myself. Also, as I mentioned, I've become this trusted legal advisor after 20 years of being in the business, as I call it, because I asked lots of probing questions. As an engineer, you are trained to be a critical thinker. And as that critical thinker, you're asking lots of probing questions. I remember being in operations and going, who the heck put this policy or practice together? It makes no sense and it makes no practicality. And so that is what I try to do now, is make sure that the different policies and practices that I'm trying to implement will also be very effective within our operations space. And finally, learning the business. We have operations on every continent in the globe except for Antarctica. And that first, I'll call it half a year, I got there in June. So between June and January, I was on the road, and especially as a legal person, this may be very surprising, but I was on the road at least twice a month, visiting sites in and outside of the US so that I could learn what each site produced, how they operated, and I got to meet people, which is most important. Next, are you waiting to be noticed? I ask people all the time. I've never been, I'll call it, I am the unicorn in the room. I've always been a minority, whether racially or gender, in my professional roles, but that never bothered me. It always inspired me. Early in my career, I didn't shy away from working hard. I was a second shift supervisor at General Mills at one of their oldest plants that they recently shut down. And through that work, I would come in early, leave late. And I talked to my department manager and said, hey, our safety numbers are horrible. After interning at Procter & Gamble for several summers while I was at Madison, I understood that, numbers were important and safety was utmost important, especially in manufacturing. So I asked and I became the department safety lead. And I ran those monthly safety meetings across shifts. So that meant I had to come in at 6 a.m., at 1 p.m., stay till 11 p.m. But I wasn't shy about that. And midway in my career, someone gave me a tip of doing a monthly journal about my accomplishments, because I was struggling at my annual performances to write down all of the good things that I had done. So what I tried to do was make sure that I wrote down these on a monthly basis so that when that annual performance review came time, my smaller achievements, as I call it, will continue to add to my credibility and reputation, because they can get lost in the shuffle. And currently in my career, I don't shy away from raising my hand. I may take on more than I probably should, but our company is small and nimble. And so I look for opportunities to get involved, to be a part, and not just wait for someone to take notice. I had a colleague, so next, just talking about turning down high profile opportunities. I had a colleague of mine commenting about how she wasn't happy where she was. And when I probed with her further, she was complaining she was always so busy, but she never got the prized assignments. She told me that she was asked to participate on a committee that was looking to hire summer interns and how to make their summer internships more effective. And she said she thought it was just a waste of time and declined the invitation. And I said, well, who's sitting on this committee? And when she told me it was the chief HR officer, her general counsel, and the VP of talent acquisition, I wanted to slap her in her face. I said, do you realize that you just gave a very powerful position away because you thought it wasn't going to be effective? You had a voice and they asked you to have a seat at the table and you declined it. Try not doing that. I know that we're all terribly busy, but it is very important that we take time and invest so that when we get these high profile opportunities, we take advantage of them. Next, I love these words that I've heard from Shirley Chisholm this summer. If you don't know, she's the first Black female candidate for a major party's presidential nomination back in 1972. And what she said was, if there's no seat at the table, bring a folding chair, because you don't make progress by standing on the sidelines. such a powerful statement, especially for women, that we don't often get a seat at the table. But make sure that if I say, if they open the door just a little bit, I'm gonna put my foot in that door so that the door doesn't slam shut in my way. For instance, at Granger, I was selected to represent our legal department when the entire enterprise was going through what I'll call a McKinsey exercise, which was looking at how we could strategically cost save. And I reported back to the GC and was making recommendations alongside him with his 3 VPs, who were widely known not to get along. But in every meeting, I sat right next to my GC, provided my recommendations, and felt like I was empowered. So when you're there, make sure that you take advantage when you have that seat at the table. And lastly, your virtual brand. I think it's so powerful that, we have all these connections now virtually, whether it's LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. What I just caution people is LinkedIn is a professional platform, and make sure it is used as such. Make sure your profile is up to date. Make sure you have a current picture on there. And, for Facebook and Instagram, if you're going to use those for professional mediums, just make sure that it reflects your professional values. If you're not, just a quick tip, maybe using a pseudonym for those other social media profiles, because otherwise you want your brand to be consistent. What you say and do in person should reflect and show up so much in your virtual brand as well. So next, I'm going to move on to strategic networking. And I want to just share a couple of things to consider, whether it's physical or virtual. The first thing is, why do you want to attend? Why do you feel like you need to be in the room? Early in my career, I attended so many events after work, 2 and 3 times events in one night sometimes. I was physically and mentally exhausted by the weekends. And then when I had my children, I tried to keep up with the schedule, and it just didn't work. And then I reflected on, there are seasons of life, and you have to realize that in every season, things will be different. And so it's important now for me to always check, well, why do I want to attend an event? Is there someone that I'm trying to meet? Is there some type of new opportunity I'm looking at that maybe, that CEO or GC is going to be in the room? But I want to use my time wisely. So I reflect on, before accepting invitations, why do I need to be there? And then what am I going to do afterwards? For me, I look at, who's the intended audience? Who do I plan on meeting at these events, especially if it's maybe a panel discussion? Who do I want to meet with on that panel? So I do some diligence beforehand, checking LinkedIn, checking, company profiles and bios. But I also want to do something afterwards. I want to be able to follow up with 1 or 2 people that I've met that I believe can offer me even more, or I can offer them more. Remember, relationships are a 2-way street. So I offer, let's do a 30-minute coffee session. I don't want to spend an extraordinary amount of time with people, but I want them to get to know me a little bit outside of the 2 or 3 minutes we may have at that event. And oftentimes now in our virtual connections, all of this still can happen. I was amazed by how many organizations were pivoting to virtual networking opportunities. And I've had to be strategic, because you can go to 6 different Zoom meetings now, or 6 different happy hours. You've got to be strategic with your time and still take these same questions into consideration. And again, how are you going to best showcase yourself? First impressions are everything, we all know. Know your elevator speech, similar to what I did when we started this presentation. Yes, you can definitely read someone's bio, but how do they come across in person, whether it's virtually or actually in person? Do they seem upbeat? Do they seem, enthusiastic about who they are and what they represent? And this leads to my last point about networking. Make sure that you are not, I call it being the fly on the wall. Make sure you are actually energetic about being at the event. Don't just attend, as I call it, in person for the free meals, and walk away for nothing to show for it. Then the other three things that I talked about are for naught. Don't just collect business cards and maybe use them as cold calls later. Try to start establishing those relationships as soon as an event happens, so that, when people reach out to you, you'll be like, yep, I actually remember you and I remember the conversation. Another trick that someone told me, especially when I was job searching early on, was journal your contacts. Make sure you can know when you met them, how you met them, and a little bit about themselves. That goes a long way later on when you're trying to reach out to them, maybe a couple of years from now when you are in a job search again. So now that you've branded yourself and now that you've done that marketing, you still got to find some TLC time for yourself. Otherwise, you'll get burnt out. So I love this visual of meaningful versus urgent. I used to be this person here at the bottom, just on the go all the time, especially as a working mom, between work schedules, a demanding work schedule, and as I mentioned, being on the road at least two weeks out of a month, having a tween and a teen, and still being a wife and a daughter. It can be very difficult. But COVID has allowed me to slow down and take some time for myself. I'll give you an example. I used to take work calls in the car with my children. I'd have to start out my day at like 7 o'clock, dropping kids off. I live in the city of Chicago. And as you hear, traffic is horrible. So even to get 10 miles to my one of my son's school would take me at least a good hour. So I'm like, I will cram in time and, do my work call so that once I get to the office by 9, I would have already done 2 hours worth of work. But what I was realizing is that I was losing that connectivity with my children. They would often say, well, mommy, why is this person, so grouchy this morning? They felt like a familiar connection with some people because I take their calls routinely. And I had to slow down and say, nope, this isn't working for me. My kids should not bleed into my work. And I need to rethink how I'm going to do my day. So instead of having work calls in the car, if I really needed to take something, I would just tell people, hey, I can't do it between 7 and 9. Can we do this at 9? And it was tough, especially for my clients that are in Europe, because that's towards the end of their day. But I had to realize that I had to set boundaries for myself so that I could be the most productive as in my role as a mother. And what I'll tell you is COVID, I know, has allowed a lot of things to bleed, especially since we're not moving from one building to another. And I've had to reestablish boundaries there. Instead of using my commute time or that commute time to just get back on the computer, I reestablished my exercise routine. I didn't have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning anymore. That's what I was doing pre-COVID. That was my me time. But I was able to get up at a more reasonable time, 6 o'clock, you may laugh. But then I started running and biking. And I enjoyed that because that got my blood pumping. I was able to listen to podcasts or even just music. It settled me for my day. And I still started then my day about 8 o'clock. And then I'd go to 3 or 4. But then, especially I call it in the middle of winter still, I'd shut it off. And I had to do this because my children were looking at me at 6 and 7 o'clock going, you've been on this computer for 10 hours a day. Are you gonna find any time for us? And so I had to establish those boundaries. And I think, all of us in this day and age, mental health is a real issue. And we definitely need to consider our mental health and well-being. It's not just the physical. So make sure as as I go through this, we're talking about meaningful versus urgent. One of the books that I'm going to reference at the end is a book from Valerie Burton called It's About Time. And she describes this term of time poverty. And it's a term to describe when we accumulate time debt from having too many obligations that require our time. It is being in persistent time debt and continually borrowing from the future, falling further and further behind, and feeling the pressure to catch up. And a second term just to think about is another term she calls bandwidth poverty. And that is having a shortage of attention due to the constant use of your cognitive resources. In other words, we're always having so much to do, our mental energy is stretched thin, and we have an attention shortage that impacts the decisions we make. And our stress levels and our commitments just get totally screwed up. In this book, she describes a working mom who's worked a long day. And her sort of relaxation time was between 5 and 6. But she would scroll through Facebook, seeing what everybody else was doing in their day. And then one day, one of her older daughters came in and was like, "Hey, Mom, what's for dinner?" And she just snapped up, like, "What do you mean, what's for dinner? Why don't you figure it out? It'll be done when it's done. It's a surprise dinner." And I just sort of laughed when I read that, because I'm like, I too have had those sort of snap responses when you just had enough and you don't want to make one other decision because you've been making decisions day in and day out. So, reading this book, it gives you a couple of things to think about. What are you using your time, and how are you using it most effectively? One of the things that rang true for me is, my perfectionist. And I think many lawyers, we have this tendency to, we can't send it out until it's absolutely perfect. And so that bled through into my personal life of everything had to be absolutely perfect. The kids' rooms had to be neat. All the towels had to be folded a certain way. And what it reminded me is, does it really matter how the towels are folded? But if I can delegate that to my kids and teach them how to do that skill, that's making them a much better adult later on. They're not waiting for someone else to fold their towels or fold their clothes. And so, any of these one things on the screen could be, what you are, I'll call it, making you time deprived. I know many women find ourselves being not asking for help, but I would also, ask you, can you outsource? One of my board of advisors told me early on in my career, "Why are you cleaning toilets on Saturdays? Why are you, making sure all the laundry's done?" That stuff can be outsourced, and it will make for a better use of your time to actually decompress or spend it other ways. So if you have that ability and that resource, make sure you think through how you're spending your time and can you really outsource. Another thing that, I have found myself doing is, again, the people pleasing. At the beginning, if you recall, I was stating that, I would always ask for feedback. And I've been that type of person asking for feedback all throughout my career. But early on in my career, I would try to do what I call people pleasing, try to change myself into who somebody else thought I should be, whether it was coming to work 2 extra hours just to sit at the desk to show that I'm here. And if you have something for me to do, I should do it. And I had to especially as my family grew, I had to think, well, why am I getting in here early? I'm sacrificing time that I could be doing something else, and I can still be just as productive as, the person that comes in at 9 o'clock. So I find now when I ask for the feedback, yes, I'm looking for what people expectations are, but before that feedback, I even ask, what are your expectations of me, my role in this project, and how you want me to show up? Do you want me to communicate with you via email, set up a meeting? How often do you want me to do that? So that on the end of the assignment, it's not, oh, well, I thought you were going to check in with me every day. No, I didn't have anything to give you. So now that I'm later in my career, one other thing I always ask is people, well, when do you need this? And if they say like, well, can I do it tomorrow? No, because you didn't give it to me in the requisite amount of time, which typically for me is at least a 48-hour turnaround. Given everything that's on my plate, I can't stop and prioritize unless it's the CEO, CFO, or somebody on our ELT team. Then yes, you have to know who you're going to push back on as well. But think of these different scenarios and how you can find more time. And then, how do you get the willpower to build more time into your day? So, there's a lot of things on this slide, but what I will say is about 6 years ago, I had a milestone birthday and I wasn't happy with my situation. I wasn't happy with the 120-mile commute I was doing every day. I wasn't happy with not having time for my family, not being able to do anything that I wanted to do because my day was built around commuting to work, being at work, and coming home. I was spending probably 12 hours outside of my home. I wasn't getting enough sleep. I wasn't exercising. And so that January 2014, I joined a small boutique gym that was catered towards women. And that challenged me to look at myself differently. I had to look at my weekly schedule and find out when I was going to have time to exercise. And the only time was 5 o'clock in the morning. And was I happy about that? No, because I felt like I'm already sleep deprived. Why am I going to sleep deprive myself more? But I had to make some choices. Did I want to be happier about the mental and physical health that I was in? Did I was a social media rut rack, as I call it. The time that I either spent on the train commuting, I scroll through Facebook aimlessly or go on LinkedIn and see what other professional articles I could read. So why not, take that to sleep on the train and actually get up a little bit early and go do something for me? So, this gym forced me to schedule. It forced me to redirect what I call those cravings of being on social media and seeing what everybody else was doing and what I was missing out on. And it allowed me to participate in some of the challenges that this boutique gym did. She did how can you lose 10 inches or not 10 inches, 10 pounds in 6 weeks? Or how can you lose 2 inches around your waist in 6 weeks? It was different challenges, but it was so motivating because it was all group hugs, groups, ahas. And it was changing your mental mindset of how to eat healthier, how to be more healthier, and how to be more happy. So no, I didn't find this 30 minutes of activity fun at first, but I found it to be much more helpful in terms of reducing my stress level and me being just a happier and more energized person around everyone I interacted with. And one thing that I'm doing lately is mindful meditations. It's starting out to be 1 or 2 minutes, but I'm trying to build my stamina up for those 10 minutes of deep breathing and just focusing in on, making sure that you can be mindful about that. And finally, one thing that I always am getting compliments on from coworkers is no matter how stressful the day is, you still find happiness, you still find laughter, you still, find a way to smile through it. And, again, just as much as your inner body is, your outer body and your outer body image matters. And so, I have to laugh. People in my office go, "We can hear you laughing on the other side of the office." And I'm like, "Sorry, but that's my way of, not sometimes cursing out people when you want to do that, but just laughing your way through it." And finally, this time budget. Again, just going back to this book by Valerie Burton, I would so recommend you visit valerieburton.com and complete this time budget online. Similar to a financial budget, you're never going to find ways to save unless you actually put it out on a piece of paper and find out how many hours are you sleeping? When are you eating? How much time are you taking on social media? How much time are you going to your place of worship? Or how much time are you giving to volunteering? Or how much time are you spending doing professional development for yourself? And then ask your question, what's the biggest, I'll call it, spend category for your time? And are you bothered that that large of a percentage is spent on that activity or activities? How do you want to meaningfully spend your time if you feel like some of the activities that have a large percentage of your time are not what you want to be doing? And how are you saving, spending, giving, and investing? And for me, I'd say, when you think about spending, can you delay that activity? Can you say no to it? Or can you delegate? Again, these are hard questions to ask sometimes, because especially, as I call it, as women, we often say no one else can do it as best as I can. Well, again, do the towels have to be folded a certain way? They're just going on a shelf and then they will be used. So can you really delegate that to someone else? And giving. Are you giving to something meaningful for you? For me, when I was asked to serve, I serve on several different nonprofit boards here in the city and couldn't find a justification as to why I would join one more board. But my mother passed of Alzheimer's about 2 years ago after fighting a battle for 7 years. And the Alzheimer's Association came to me and said, "Would you mind sitting on the Illinois chapter board of the Alzheimer's Association? We need more people of color on our board. We also want you to have that voice of how communities need to be represented." And I said, wow, I know what I had to go through for the past 7 years of being a caretaker for my mother. And I know that I was at a position of privilege in those positions, meaning I am an attorney. I knew that I had to get their affairs and finances in order, who I could contact to get, estate planning done, that I would become the power of attorney after my sister and I discussed who was best because she's not in the city. Again, I couldn't say no to an organization that I knew if I could share a little bit of wisdom with that organization to help better even a larger community. And so that is something I do give and give of meaningfully. And then investing. How do you invest your time? Are you investing in you? For me, I set maybe 5 goals this year, and I'm not I'll call it a New Year's resolution type of girl. But I set, one of my goals was to read one professional book a quarter. And why did I want to do that? Because I wanted to see what kind of tricks of the trades that I could take advantage of to continue to propel me further in my career. Even being in a senior leadership position in my company, again, I'm a lifelong learner, and I want to be able to continue to invest in myself. And even with COVID, I am continually looking at one conference a year I want to go to. And, I was very hesitant because up until about a few weeks ago, this conference was going to be in person in Houston. And I was like, not getting on a plane. But she converted to being a hybrid and eventually just totally virtual. And so I'm able to come to this conference, and I'm really looking forward to it because it's a platform. It's over 1,000 women of that are in in-house positions, and it's a great networking for me, and it just rejuvenates me as being sort of one of few women in an in-house counsel position. So how are you investing in your time? And finally, saving. How are you saving time so that you can spend things that you want to do and enjoy? For me, again, it's getting up at 6 so that I can ride my bike and enjoy the sunrise, over Lake Michigan. For others, it may be, finding time at the end of the day to see the sunset. Or maybe it's finding that time that you never had to visit family members, whether it's an ailing aunt or uncle, and it shouldn't be when people are ailing or sick. How can you just go visit them and just have a nice little chat? So, again, think about your time budget, and I would encourage you to use Valerie Burton. So, I'm wrapping up here, but books to consider to be an improved you. I never say, you want to be better or great, but how can you just improve yourself? And a couple of these books are from the FPSA's One Alliance book club that I've joined and really found inspiring. So The Nice Girls Still Don't Get the Corner Office. Great book, quick read. You do sort of this assessment at the beginning, and then it tailors to the chapters that you want. And the chapters are really quick. The Women Code is another book that I ran past through a different organization, but it's great. It puts down what are your values personally, what are your values professionally, and makes you think through how are you going to unlock the code to be the best self that you can present. Daring Greatly was one of the latter books that the WAN organization did, and It's About Time is the book that I just finished reading recently that I highly encourage you to review if you're trying to look for more time. So with that, I know we're coming to a close, but Diane, if you want to let me know if there's questions that we can address.
Yep, hang on, I'm coming back. I'm joining you back. So I would invite those of you that are in our audience to chat some questions. I don't see any yet. And of course, I always have 100 questions myself. So I will ask them if none of you ask them. I'll watch if you have some questions. First of all, thank you, Lynn. I loved all of your great examples. Your examples were so personal, and I think all of us could really relate to them because of those examples. I really, I think that as you talked about that time budget and finding meaningful, just finding the use of your time and kind of charting it, that really resonated with me because I think that all of us have time that slips away. We spend time doing all kinds of things, and particularly if you look at your screen time and you say, did I really spend 4 hours, on social media today? Did I really do that? So exactly. I think that thought of charting your time and then really analyzing how do you shed the things that you don't want to be spending time doing, whether it's hiring others or saying no to that third committee. So I really, that was very meaningful to me. And you said that time budget came from the Valerie Burton book. Is that what you said?
Yes. So, and she has it online. So valerieburton.com. She has it right there for you to do that. So I encourage you to try to take that little quiz, as I call it, and just see where your time is being spent. It really opened my eyes up to, and she does it bi-weekly and a monthly. So you can
Well, and I think it's relevant to people in all stages of their career because as I was at the back end of my career, I started thinking about how could I do more work, how could I do more not-for-profit. My kids weren't a daily maintenance item any longer, and I really hadn't taken that inventory. When I took that inventory, I found whole pieces of my life that were missing because all of my time got sucked up in my corporate identity. So I just think that it's such a meaningful exercise, no matter where you are in your career. If you're an early career working mom, nearing the end of your career, because helps you build a strategic path to how you might want to be spending your time.
Exactly, exactly.
I'm looking here quickly. I want to take just a few more minutes because I don't want to end early. I saw some thank yous, but I am not seeing any questions yet. So I think you referred to a board of advisors, and I don't know that you expanded on that unless my mind was wandering and I was thinking of some other things. And I also like that thought. Do you want to expand just a little bit about your personal board of advisors and talk about how you set that up and how you use those folks in your life?
Yes, definitely. So I refer to mentors and mentees as my board of advisors. Again, it's a two-way street, whether I'm mentoring people below me or, trying to find mentorship from people that are later in their career. But I look at it as not just one person's perspective. I'm looking at it from various perspectives, and that can be women and men. I try to get a holistic perspective on, especially when I'm trying to make strategic career moves. Does this make sense? What am I not thinking through? For an opportunity that's occurring in my current role now, it was, well, do I really want to take this on? I already got a full plate. And I went out to my board of advisors, as I call it, and called and talked to people to say, hey, does this make sense? And they gave me thoughtful suggestions of, well, what more to ask for, and also how to position yourself for more compensation. We always want to take on more roles, but I think as women, we also have to be willing to ask the hard question of compensation. Our work doesn't come for free. There are many studies that show that, our work is underpaid, undervalued. And one thing that I failed to mention is, one of my board of advisor members told me early on, don't shrug off your hard work by saying, oh, that was no big deal. I could do it just, if it took you 4 hours, that was not a big deal. That is a big deal. And you need to show that. So that's just a tip that I've gotten from my board of advisors that I, have definitely resonated with me. And I have removed the words from my vocabulary of, oh, it was no big deal. Take that out of your vocabulary.
That's interesting. And you started with another thought that in the beginning, talking about people being offered high profile opportunities, and usually they're ad hoc, they're adjacent to the work that they do. And so many of us think, well, if I just do my job really well and I keep my head down, I'll get promoted. And I think you really busted that myth early on, saying, wait a minute, these high profile ad hoc committees are to allow you to have visibility and develop relationships with people beyond your immediate supervisor and even your supervisor's supervisor. They're giving you a company-wide role view. They're giving you relationships outside of your functional area. And I thought that was just a really strong piece of advice. And again, people get those opportunities and they say, oh, no, I'm too busy. And that was, how wise of you to have identified that and give that advice to your mentees.
Yep. It's definitely, again, time busters as people look at it, but you have to find the time.
Yeah. I think I'm just going to give you the opportunity to leave any final thoughts with the group. I did think it was kind of interesting from the survey how many non-moms there are and how many kind of small team leaders and senior leaders we had on this call listening to you. And then so many of them were kind of looking for new ways to network or kind of a broader view. So it gave me an idea of who listens to our webinars too, because we many times don't know the profile. We know the names, we know the companies, but we don't know who's been on the call. Do you have any parting thoughts that you'd like to share with the group of listeners? And then I'm going to go to what's next after you're finished. So any
Sure.
parting thoughts you have, Lynn?
Sure, and I'm just going to check with Elena because at least in my chat, they said a couple of questions did come in, but I don't see them.
Sure.
I didn't see them either. Elena, do we have some?
Yes, we do. Many people said
Oh,
thank you
okay.
for doing the question section. Do you have any advice for a recently graduated female entering the business world at this time?
Sure. So as I stated, I came out as a chemical engineer, but then spent about 5 years in industry and then went back to get my JD MBA. And so I started out at a law firm, so not in the business world. But what I would tell you as a young career starter, make sure that you are showing your work ethic, and building your brand so that you know what people are saying about you, even when you're not in the room. So again, asking for that feedback. People hate to give feedback, because they're like, I don't want to hurt this person's feelings, or I feel like I'm being too harsh. But you need to demand the feedback. And it's not just, oh, you did a good job. What specifically, if you know in your heart that you could do better, ask for it. Say, I see that you did too much changing of my spreadsheet with my data. Is there something else that I should be thinking of? You take it upon yourself to say, I know I'm not perfect, but give them the opportunity then to give you that feedback. So as a younger career starter, that's what I would suggest, is at least ask for that feedback, but also determine what your brand is going to be. Are you going to be known for the worker bee? Are you going to, again, not to be the one that just checks the box and gets things done? Or are you going to take the extra mile and say, I'm going to thoroughly review this and highlight the things that I think need to be changed? So just one suggestion.
And here's a big one. How do you ask for more money?
Do your homework. I think we are all very shy about sharing compensation data, but there are many institutions now that are providing that compensation data. Make sure you do your homework, talk to recruiters, even if you're not in the market for talking to recruiters. Make sure you ask recruiters, well, what's the going rate for this? And in many states, one of the boards that I'm on here in Illinois, we're talking about fair working wages. And that means that as you go into new positions, they can't ask you for your salary history. That helps to even the playing field. If they don't know what your salary history is, they've got to pay you the equal pay as your counterpart, which may be a male counterpart. So do your homework and make sure that, again, demand what you want. And if you know your worth, ask for it. All they can say is no, or you can get into negotiation. But a closed mouth, they're never going to know what you're worth.
A lot of people struggle with a difficult boss. Do you have any suggestions for managing up?
Yes, difficult bosses, I've had plenty. And so I would say, again, find out what their expectations are. If you've had enough encounters where you're like, I thought I knew what you were talking about, you need to sit down and then set expectations. Let's have a monthly meeting where we go through my assignments and say, I'll give you a status update and give you progress. But difficult bosses, and if it doesn't get better, especially in this market, and I know there's more than 1 million or 3 million people unemployed right now, but there's a lot of opportunities still awaiting you at another place. So I would say try not to be stifled and self-doubt, because I've had that occurrence too of, I'm not good enough, I shouldn't be here, and you should be there, but you have someone that just isn't willing to work with you. And go to HR if it's needed.
How would you deal with an old-fashioned stereotypical roles in a company, especially when it's male-dominated? How do you recommend to get your foot in the door or to move up?
I'm going to suggest you read Nice Girls Don't Get the Corner Office. There's a whole section in that book about stereotypical positions and how you move out of those stereotypical positions, whether it's HR or finance. How can we get into more P&L roles? And so, again, the smaller projects, getting outside of your comfort zone or getting outside of your silo can make a world of difference.
And then another question was, how do you spend your time on the airplane? Reading books?
Depending on if it's an early morning flight, I'm gonna sleep. Sleep is important, depending on, especially, I've done some overnighters and landed in Europe, and have a whole full day, so I'll sleep. Otherwise, I unwind, whether it's finding a new movie that I wanted to watch or reading a good book that is not a professional book, but just a book that I want to read.
Perfect. And that looks like most of the questions. I might have missed one or two interjections, but that's it.
Thanks, Elena. Diana, I know you wanted to talk about upcoming.
I think that's good because we're just about out of time. Yeah, I do. So if we can move to the next slide, I'd appreciate that.
Sure.
And if you don't bring it up, I'll just tell you about it. There we go. So now let's keep going to the next one. There we go. There is our next upcoming webinar, and the webinar will be, you need to back up one page. There we go. October 29th, and we've moved it just a little later in the day from 3 to 4. We're trying different time slots to see what works best across the country since we have people coming in from all over. Our presenter will be Tyra James, and she's a life coach, and her discussion is the keys to envisioning your next. I'm sure you'll see the information coming out within probably in September, and then you can sign up for this one. Also want to remind folks that we are kicking off the mentor-mentee program in September. So if you have not signed up and you want to be a mentor or you'd like to be a mentee, at this point, I think we have 2 professional mentor circles, and we have 8 or 9 student mentor circles. So we are engaging the Young Professionals Network to help us with the students, get the student chapters. And we are, so again, you can reach out to Elena, the email with Elena, you can go right to the FPSA org network, and you can find out more about the mentorship program. Tomorrow actually is our first training of mentors. I think we've got 12 people signed up now as mentors. And so we're really excited to get that kicked off. With that, I see that we are just about out of time, and I want to thank Lynn once again for sharing her wisdom, sharing her thoughts, giving us a recommended reading list, and really all your insights and wisdom. I thought it was an excellent webinar, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks again for allowing me. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.